Good morning and good afternoon and good evening. I don't know if everybody knows this, but we are scattered around the world. I'm in California. Audrey's in Western Canada. Richard is in New Jersey. Bertold is in Ohio, and Lucinda is in Spain.
Yes, that's right. East Coast.
We cover the globe. But anyway, um, the topic for today and is basically I thought it would be helpful for each of us to talk about what our writing routine is. And I differentiate between, and I'll just use it as an example. If I decide to write a short story, I can write a story within a couple of days or whatever. And so that's not really the routine I'm looking for. It's more when you come up with a longer story, an idea that you has captured your imagination and you've decided to write this thing to the bitter end. And the question is, what's your routine? And for instance, I know Audrey has talked before about she basically tries to write one handwritten page a day until she's done. And she kind of has a target date when she wants to finish it. But I want to go a little bit deeper in terms of like, environment. How regular do you try to write when you're in that frame of mind? Can you be around people? Do you have to not be around people? Do you listen to music? Do you not listen to music? Um, all of think about what it takes for you to start something and finish something. And part of this is purely selfish because I'm so struggling with trying to develop a routine. And I personally think that free time is the death of hard work because you always tomorrow. So anyway, I don't want to know who wants to start. I'll just mention that when I started writing, I didn't have this problem. I was able to write in the evenings and on weekends and write quite a bit for a few years. But now I struggle with all the distractions and other on and trying to figure out how to just sit down and write on a regular. So who would like to start?
Well, I'll jump in. I agree about free time is the death of writing projects because I did really well when I was working, like full time. So I, work the good old 7-hour day plus a commute, and then there's the rest of your life. But I consistently wrote from about 7 o'clock in the evening till about 10 o'clock, or yeah, 7 till 10, 3 hours. And I just cranked out stuff like those 4 Herbert West books. That's how they came out, and I couldn't not do it. And I mean, even at work, if I had an idea, I'd make a little note, on a piece of paper and bring it home. And I just could hardly wait to get back to that project. All 4 of those books. But then when I retired, you think I'd have loads of free time. I don't know. I kept saying I'm less efficient now. I just waste time. I find it hard to get to things. Anything can be a distraction. I'm not sort of clamped into a schedule I can't really do much about. So I just kind of fluff around and not accomplish much. And then there's the whole thing about the stuff I'm working on now doesn't sort of demand to be written the same as the things I wrote earlier. And I don't know what that's telling me. Maybe it's telling me those things don't need to be written and I should just either quit or just kind of let it go until something really compelling comes along, and then I'll make I won't have to force myself to write. Now, in terms of environment, I wrote those other 4 books in a room in the basement. And that was sort of the writing room. And I'd go down there, and the only other being in there with me was a cat. The cat has since died, of course. Maybe that's part of the problem. But, there were no distractions, and there was no internet either. So I think that was probably an ideal setup. Whereas now, the basement room is kind of used as a junk room, so it's not as hospitable. I don't really like being down there. So I share an office, this room here, with my husband. And even though we don't interfere with each other at all, just knowing there's another person there sort of bugs me. Say, do you see that my image is sort of flickering?
Yes.
Sort of like the ghost of Bertold is
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
weird. That's like I'm haunting you, Audrey. That's creepy.
That's a new thing. It happened on another Zoom meeting I was on a couple days ago, and I thought, what's going on? Anyway, so that's my story. I find, I don't know if it's being older, having more time, not having a really compelling project, but yeah, I'm finding it hard to get my act together with writing.
I want to two comments. One is I hope that uh, my comment about free time is the death of writing, and your confirmation of that doesn't scare Richard off.
Right.
Yeah, I'll bring that up. Actually, that's in my mind.
The other thing is, I much like you, and I'm sure I've described this before, but when I first started writing, I had my full-time job. It was a stressful job. My kids were 8 and 6, and I was coaching them both in baseball and soccer, which basically meant I was coaching and going to games almost year round. And I was running and training for half marathons, and I mean, just so much stuff. And I was able to, like you, I would write for a couple of hours in the evening and write in the in-between moments on weekends. And I wrote a couple novels and dozens of short stories while all of that was going on. And now that I have free time, it's like, it's just, I don't know. I don't know.
Hmm.
So, Richard, do you want to?
Sure. Okay. So as I posted and they've alluded to, I've posted on Twitter, retirement will soon be thrust upon me. In theory, we'll see. It's going to happen in about a month, but maybe I'll pick up another job, though I doubt it. Anyway, so my process, I think, in terms of that, in terms of work, is yes, I do have a full-time job. I can guarantee you, I can't guarantee that I will write more. That's my goal. As I stated on Twitter, I really am going to focus more, but I can guarantee you that work wasn't the driver or assistance because I spend so much time at work writing and at the keyboard that it's very difficult for me to write after, to squeeze it. So usually that's why it takes me so long to put out any book. Usually I wait to vacation times and I'll get a day or two to wind down. Then I actually feel like, yeah, I could start attending to my book. And then if it's underway enough, like maybe more than halfway composed, then yeah, as I'm doing my normal work, I can take a little time in the evenings and weekends, etc., especially with things like editing and what. But the process itself, because you brought up another thing, you asked about music and stuff like that, and distractions. You both mentioned distractions. Um, First of all, distractions for me are actually sometimes a good thing because I am a procrastinator of a major magnitude. And what drives me to do anything is knowing that there is something I need to do that I want to do even less. So, so having a lot to do, actually, believe it or not, writing becomes more and more attractive. Even if I was stuck in a tough place, I think, well, I do have to fix, that fence outside and it's pouring today. I think I'd rather than go out there and get soaking wet, let it just hang there and I'm going to do some writing, something like that. So um, it becomes more attractive. As far as other kinds of attractions, I think it was really when you mentioned music really triggered something in me. There are a couple of rules I made for myself about when I do get underway and I really latch on to something good. And again, this isn't short stories. I know you mentioned short stories, very different process there. But for the novels, once I have my concept, once I have like maybe a decent chapter put in and I think where I feel like I've got something to chew on and this is going to be potentially a novel, I completely cease reading anything but maybe news articles. Anything. I mean, if there's something, except maybe tweets too, but even there, sometimes I try to avoid some of the humorous ones because I'm very impressionable when it comes to things like humor. And I don't want to have someone else's voice at that point. I don't want to have someone else's jokes and styles while I'm doing that because it will happen. If I watch a Monty Python movie, I guarantee you my book will be very Monty Python-esque. And they've already done that. So there is that rule, and then the other is music, and I really do. sort of immerse myself when I'm having trouble in particular passages. I will look for music. The word inspire isn't the right word, but affects me in a way that where my brain can almost zone into a feeling or some. So it could be. It doesn't even if it's a very like a heavy rock song or something. The lyrics is probably not so much as important as the tempo. Same thing with classical music. And that's another interesting thing. I will shift as I'm writing the book very much in different styles and methods of music than I would than if I would normally listening over the weekend. I may feel like I want to hear big band era type stuff, on a Sunday. But when I'm writing, I might shift in the middle of something I'm working on and just say, this style of music isn't doing it for me. I need something with a different tempo and feel. So that is another integral part of my whole process. So anyway.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I'll let you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and you also mentioned something about, editing, et cetera. I could go more because I've talked about it before, and I'll go more later if you ask more questions on it. But the whole how I construct, where I start, where I end, and when I do my editing. I don't know if you want to cover that now or just keep going around a few times.
Curious what, you mentioned like when you get about halfway through and you you said something about because of work and how much that you do, write at work, you kind of are reluctant to write outside of work. But when you get to somewhere about a halfway point, then you might start doing more. So what does that look like? Is it an hour here, an hour there?
Yeah, it is. It is an hour here, an hour there. I shouldn't say this, but sometimes if somebody cancels a meeting and I'm twiddling my thumbs waiting for the next one, maybe I'll squeeze something in then. But I don't care anymore. It's only like 4 more weeks. When are you going to fire me? But but mostly it will be like when the workday is over, I'll have something to eat, and then because all day long, all day long in the back of my mind is I know what I want to write. Or at least I think I know what I want to write until I write it. And then, as you know, being authors, you sometimes will sit down and get 5 words out and then go, it wasn't really what I thought it was going to be. But yeah, and it would be an hour here, an hour there.
We've talked about distractions, and the interesting thing to me about my own approach is that I feel like I've changed over the years. And I've described that when I was in law school, I tried once or twice to go into the library where it's quiet and study. And that was just absolute hell for me. I mean, I just couldn't do it, but I could go sit in the center and study with all the activity in the student center. And then when I started writing, we only had a desktop in our office. So in order to write, I had to remove myself from my family. And my kids were, again, 8 and 6. They're at this wonderful age where there's so much going on, and I didn't want to remove myself from that. So after a couple of months, I got a laptop. And legitimately, most of my writing for probably the next 5 or 6 years was in the family room while they were playing or watching TV, or out by the pool while they were swimming, or sitting on a chair in the front yard while they're playing outside or whatever. That's how I wrote for a long time. Now I find myself not able to do that. I go upstairs, close the door, put some music on, and that's the best way for me to write these days is to isolate myself from the rest of the house. But then there's the other kinds of distractions, which I think Audrey alluded to, which is, all the stuff on the internet. And you mentioned, well, the fence has to be fixed, or garden. I like to cook. I like, it's like there's the environmental distractions, and then there's the distractions that just give you something else to do. And even there, when I'm writing, if I'm writing up here and I am making progress, I still like check Twitter every 10 or 15 minutes, or check my email I can't just focus entirely on one for 2 or 3 hours. I've never been able to.
I have, sorry, I haven't had a problem with that when I hit a point where I've got a clear feel and vision of what I'm doing at that point in the book. And start, you know, when you start just typing, it's as if the words are coming through your hands more than, and you really find then at that point, yeah, I can go for an hour, 2 hours, 2 hours without checking anything. But the whole world zones out and I'm in the book. So, but on the other times, yeah, you know, and because to me, again, I think those distractions help. If my brain is a little stuck and I'm not feeling it, just bouncing around is part of the creative process.
Yeah. Okay. Lucinda?
I'm going to repeat a lot of what's already been said. When I was writing for a living, I was obviously running to broadcast deadlines and, you know, all the rest of it. So I had to think fast, I had to write fast, I had to write to a particular time, had deadlines all over the place. When I retired, I threw myself into all sorts of other things for about 6 months, and then I began to get this withdrawal symptoms, and I needed to write. And I wrote and I wrote and I wrote, and you know, the books came out. However, I've also had a change. COVID, I adored because it was silent, it was quiet. To write, I need silence. I don't need anyone coming in and saying, would you like a cup of coffee? Which is very sweet of them and all the rest of it. But no, no, no. I like absolute silence, no music. When I'm writing, I'm in the book. I'm there. I have to stop myself laying a table for Amy, a place at the table for Amy, because to me, she was really alive. She was there. She was a living person. But for some reason, I've had this sort of, it's not a writer's block. I've got book 5 in my head. I know the beginning, the middle, and the end. But I don't think, I just can't bring myself at the moment to write. And don't ask me why. I'm procrastinating. I will go and clean a cupboard out now rather than write. And I'm not quite sure. I'm frightened. I've never been like this before. I've always wanted to write. I've always felt that I had to write. And it's about 9 months now. I write for a local magazine. And I do have a deadline for that. And I can sit down, I can churn out a couple of articles in a couple of hours, no problem at all. But I don't know, that drive has just gone. And just like Audrey, I'm also fiddling about, thinking, oh, well, I'll do this or I'll do that. And it's not as if I'm madly socializing or anything like that. It's just, I don't know, I seem to have lost the drive, lost the will to, as I say, it's really worrying me, but I do like silence. I like to be in the story. And the only time I will stop is when I get to that dip, the halfway dip, which is generally about 35 to 40,000. And you suddenly realize that you probably need a subplot to bring it up to the 80,000 plus. And I will go outside and I'll pace up and down the terrace until it clicks. Or it might click if I've gone to the supermarket or something like that. The one time that I can't write novel-wise is that at one time, my other half said to me, I'm very lonely. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, I said, I haven't been out for days. And he said, yes, I know you're there, but you're not with me. You're not here. And I said, no, I'm actually in Africa or wherever I happen to be writing. And then he said, all right, I'll have to get some activity. So he started going out and playing petanque and he went walking with his friends. But then I knew that on a Wednesday, he would leave the house about 9 and he'd get back about 2. And I had those 5 hours. And very often my mind would seize up. I've got to write now. I've got 5 hours. I've got 5 hours of silence, no interruptions. I've turned my cell phone off and et cetera, et cetera. And I felt such pressure that I sort of sat there and I couldn't find the words. The other thing that's really worrying me at the moment is that at one time I would sit down at the keyboard and I would just write. It was just all flow. It just went on and on. And my editing was really a bit pathetic because I couldn't find much, because I do go back. I write a sentence and then if I've made a typo, I'll go back and correct it and then keep typing. I'm beginning to lose my words. I don't know whether it's early stage dementia or just my age, but I'm actually sitting there thinking, I need a better word for damaged. What can I say for damaged? Falling apart. No, that won't work. Coming apart. No, and that to me has been, maybe that's part of my reluctance now to sit down and write. I don't know. So I'm sorry to be a bit depressing about this, but it's just how it is.
A lot of what you described, Lucinda, is a lot of what I'm struggling with as well. I like you. I know I want to write. I have these stories that some of them are half completed, some of them are still just ideas that I've barely scratched the surface of. But I know I want to write them. But when it comes to just sitting down and writing, I just used not to.
That's something I don't do though, is that I only ever do, apart from my writing for the magazine, only do one thing at a time. I tend not to do short stories because if I have a really great idea, then I don't want to waste it on a short story. I would like to develop it, make a full novel, right? But I only work on one project at a time.
I work on one project at a time too, for the most part. It's just that I struggled with all of the things that we're talking about here. I've started things, get to a certain point. You mentioned 35 to 40,000 words is your kind of um, wait, what am I doing moment or something like that. For me, it's usually around 25,000 words. So I have 3 or 4 things that I started. I got to that point. I couldn't figure out how to continue. So then I would start something else. So those are all kind of in the background lurking, but I do try to focus on one at a time when I do write. So, but
You both mentioned something I want to ask, not to interrupt the flow here, but you mentioned word count, and I do use, just like you both indicated, word count to see sort of how much have I done. Is this enough for full novel length? Sometimes I'll look at it, or is it too much, whatever. But that's at the high level. There are a lot of people I notice that use word count as a motivator. Like, today I'm going to write X number of words. I don't know about you, and that's a good positive motivator if that's your thing. But for me, it's the last thing I look at is how many words did I write, or it's my target. My target is more or less, I want to get this section. I want to attack this dialogue or whatever it is. The sort of more story chunks. Than they are word counts. Do any of you rely on word count as your motivator?
I have done, yes. When I've had a sort of time where I haven't perhaps been quite as desperate to write, I'd say, right, I'll do a minimum of 2,000 words a day, and therefore that's 40 days, take out Sundays. I should have the first draft finished by this particular date. And I will actually note that in the diary. I've even stopped doing that at the moment, but that would be my minimum. Partly though, because I was living on my own while being married, if you understand. And I felt that I really had to contribute to being a partner, part of the time, and not leave him on his own all the time. And we're also in a very small place, which means that when it's in winter, I can't write where I am now in the back bedroom because it's too cold. So yeah, 2,000 words was,
Okay.
but if I got carried away, then it didn't matter. I just keep going and going and going. And I'd feel a sense of achievement if I'd managed 3,000 words in a day, or 5,000. 5,000 are probably about the most I've ever written in a day.
Okay.
I don't necessarily, I sit down, identify a word count goal that I want to get to during that session. But when I'm done, if I can say I wrote 500 words or 1,000 words, then I feel good about it. If I'm done and I managed 75 words, well, what was the point? Uh, the thing that I'm working on has relatively short chapters. I think what I'd like to do is be able to, when I sit down, write a chapter. Something like that. And then if I do that, then I've managed to add, 1,500 or 2,000 words to the story.
I don't worry about word count that much, although with this page a day thing, I guess in effect, a page is about 500 words. And if I can fill up the page and go on to another one, then I'm doing really well. And if I just get to the 3/4 point and fizzle out, then at least I've put in the effort for that day. That's the nice thing about it, is if you've managed to crank out a few hundred words or a page or whatever, and the story's moving along, then you kind of done your bit for that day and you can go off and do other things without feeling guilty. But I'm telling you, it wasn't like this when I was writing my first few books. It was there, I could hardly wait to get to it. And I just kept going and going. And, I'd have to shut down for the night. And I think, oh, too bad, I guess, because I had to go to work the next day, so I couldn't just keep going. But yeah, it's sort of a difference between where you can't stop yourself writing and where you sort of push yourself to do it. And I don't know if it's because, I've written all these books, I finished them, I published them, I worry about, how well they're doing or selling or not selling or reviews or any of that stuff. I wasn't in that state when I wrote the first few books, because I was from 2000 till about 2005, and I didn't publish anything. I was still trying, doing the whole querying thing and all that. And then I kind of gave up on that, and I was kind of in limbo. And then in 2010, I discovered self-publishing. So at that point, I did that. And ever since then, it hasn't been as easy to write anymore. And I don't know, it's some sort of weird mental thing that happened. And it might be age, but I think it's more of I don't know, maybe I feel like I have more things to live up to, whereas before it was just kind of well, let's just do it. It doesn't matter if it fizzles out. Let's just kind of, it was a big adventure. And now it's more of almost like a job in a way. So yeah, I don't know.
I can relate to that too, Audrey. I think when you get emails from readers to say, please, when's the next book's coming out, or, and we haven't seen you on Twitter for a while, and wow, you haven't been on Facebook. The pressure just got to me more and more. I've hardly been on Facebook since this year, in fact. I haven't been on Twitter for ages and ages. Just, I cut out a whole load of emails and unsubscribed all over the place just to cut that down. I was finding it was taking 2 hours a day just to get through the emails and the promos and everything. And it was just getting too much. And it takes all the enjoyment out of wanting to get the next book out, because there's this pressure all the time as, oh, you haven't published for a while. What's happening? When's the next book coming out? And, I always rebelled against that to some extent, because I used to churn stuff out, obviously, for broadcast. And I was like a mince machine, and all of a sudden I'm having this rebellious phase, just like a teenager.
Yeah, I was just say, Bertold, you haven't gone yet, so sorry to derail that a little bit.
Oh, that's fine. So I hadn't written anything for about 3 years. I guess you could call it writer's block, but set in sort of around the same time as COVID. I don't know if it was related or just a coincidence that happened, but then last summer I had an idea and I decided I'm going to write this. I'm going to just write something every night, even if it's just a sentence. It doesn't matter. Something must get written. So that ended up being about a 30,000 word story, which Mark just read a draft of. So it did get completed. And that one was interesting because this was much more of a brute force method. I had the basic outline of the story in my head, and it was just like, okay, write it down bit by bit. Usually once I have something, like you say, I can get going, and once I'm in the zone, then it's good. This one, well, actually towards the end I kind of got in that zone, but mostly it was just a long slog. But it something happened by just telling myself I'm going to write something, even if I'm not happy with it. I'm just going to write it and then fix it later. And again, this is only a 30,000 word thing, which I applaud those of you who are writing in the 60, 80,000 or longer frame because I struggle to get to that. As far as like writing environments and things, I think I've talked about this before, but I'll sometimes, if I have a specific scene that calls for something which an atmosphere I can easily create, I'll try to do that. Like I wrote a scene once that's in a cabin late at night and there's candlelight. So I stayed up real late. So it was late, quiet, wee small hours of the morning, just lit some candles and sat around in this writing. I'll do that sort of thing sometimes. Um, with music and things like that, I well, the thing I'm writing now actually is very conducive to having like 80s pop music going in the background while I'm working on it. So that's what I did. That I can see that that's the sort of thing that's highly specific to what you're writing. It may not work for certain things, but I do like to have something theme appropriate going.
Do any of you, when you're writing, try to write at a specific time of the day, or do you think it's better to write first and then go celebrate with your distractions, or write later, or is there any kind of schedule you try to follow?
No, I like to be sort of like, I can't just go from getting up and then going to write. I know people who do get up at ungodly hours, like 5 in the morning, and they go and they spend 2 or 3 hours writing before their day really starts. I can't do that. I like to get up, have coffee, have breakfast. And of course, there's the spouse who's sometimes doing things and other times not doing much. And so we have to kind of work out our schedule. And then there's so yeah, I think my prime writing time now when I do it is from about mid-morning to maybe 2 o'clock, somewhere in there. I don't spend all that time writing, but yeah, then I'm moderately alert and I've kind of cleared the decks of whatever needs to be done immediately, and then I can take the time and write. Evening isn't as good because I tend to spend the evening with, that's the other thing. There's the blog, right? You have a blog. I tend to be pretty regular in posting something every week. So I've always got this sort of, okay, what am I going to do for the blog? And sometimes I have a bunch of things sort of worked out ahead of time, and other times I don't. And then there's responding to comments and visiting other blogs. And that kind of takes about an hour or two a day. And that's what I usually do in the evening. So that's not prime writing time for me, even though it used to be when I was working. So there it is. It's a state of mind you're in, basically.
Anybody?
They say that you're either a morning person or a night person, and I'm a night person, but unfortunately I married a morning person. So I tend to get up maybe half an hour later, and I would normally sit down in the evening if I was on my own, and I would write then, and I would write into maybe 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. All that's changed now. So I do find that I'm writing sort of like Audrey, sort of mid to late morning. However, I've sort of felt so guilty about not doing much Spanish, learning Spanish. So I have been doing Spanish lessons every morning. And by the time I finish that, I'm so tired that the thought of actually sitting down and writing has taken all my brain power. But yes, I would say that I would have to fit it in like Audrey for about, say, 12 o'clock to about 2, 3, depending, but it hasn't been that regular.
For me, I don't generally like too much structure. And as I said before, I would do most of my writing during a weekend or week off or something like that away from work. So I have written all hours of the day. And I will say this, and this should come as no surprise to people from what I've seen from other authors who've posted stuff like this, but my most creative period of writing would be somewhere between maybe 1 and 4 in the morning, but it's the most error filled. It is where, when I go back and look at, there are whole sentences that didn't get completed, but it's very creative. And then, the better writing, the more stylistic writing is sometime during the daytime, and that's better crafted. But that's so sometimes when I am stuck, I hope that I'm going to get inspiration in the wee hours when I'm up very late, and usually I do. I usually do.
So maybe it's a good idea to write the first draft at night and then do the editing in the daytime.
I'll be very honest. There have been times with the short story stuff where I just get so preoccupied with the thought as I'm trying to fall asleep. Let me actually side thing. It takes me anywhere from half an hour to an hour to fall asleep since I was a child. My brain, and I do get occasional insomnia. That's because my brain won't shut off. But it takes a long time to while down. About once a month, it's not going to happen. But there are times when I'm winding down, but that thought of the short story is there, and I will get up and I will go and I'll be half asleep, but I don't care, and I get some of it out. Because this, like I said, it's just that creative spurt. I don't want to lose it. I don't want to lose whatever was going on, and maybe it doesn't pan out the next day in the bright sunlight. But yeah, there is something about the mind being much more receptive. I mean, when you're normally dreaming, that sort of makes sense, but much more receptive when it's a little fatigued and you don't care about your wordsmithing. You just got concepts.
And you don't want to lose it. That's the part
Right.
That's a big thing. I mean, there are times when I'm doing something manual, cleaning something or out in the garden, and a little, like a sentence will drift by, or just some sort of mental image of whatever it is I intend to write. And if I don't drop at what I'm doing and go and scribble it down, it's gone. And somehow, if that happens, if I lose that perfect little gem of whatever it is, I always feel so guilty. It's like, the muse or some deity has bestowed this little gift to me, and I fumbled the ball. And so that feels bad, and it doesn't really contribute to furthering the work. So yeah, it seems that this whole writing process has a lot of guilt lurking somewhere, doesn't it?
You could get so
sorry. Go ahead.
I say you get so aggressive when the flow is going and the muse is talking to you, and somebody said, "Would you like another cup of coffee?" You just want to explode.
I just have a little humor because you mentioned when you're out saying the garden or something, and that when I do, I have my cell phone. I will jot something down, or even this, a little bit of a text. But usually I'll type it down. But this is the funny part. There are times when then a week later I go to look and I go, "What the hell do I mean?" But those 5 or 6 words that I put down no longer. And so I'm like, oh well, didn't help.
Almost invariably, some of my best ideas seem to come when I'm like at the gym. That's
really?
the top place, is especially like when I'm running. And it can be very inconvenient to try to write down an idea when that's happening. But that's also, I tend to get, well, I mean, I won't say they're great ideas, but they're some of my ideas. They're some of my favorite ones. So
it's funny because you mentioned before you were listening to 80s music, and when I exercise, I try all the time music, but 80s music is the best for exercising. I should give you my playlist and see if you get a book out of it.
A couple of you have mentioned, well, I'll just explain my thought is when I first started writing, how many of you had the experience where you're having dinner with your family and they're talking and you have absolutely no idea what they're saying because you're in your story in your head?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That never happens for me anymore.
Oh, really?
And when writing, I was so wrapped up in my head in so many ways. At work, I could be in a meeting and I would be participating in the meeting, but there was this other part of my brain going at the same time, thinking about where I was in the story and coming up with ideas and what to do next. And, at home with my family again, they never really, I don't think they ever really commented on it, but I'm sure that there were times when I was staring off into space, because I in the story in my head. And that's one of those things that just doesn't happen as much anymore, where I get so wrapped up into the story that I'm like I said, I'm in it in my head even when I'm not writing.
Don't you think we all sound very normal now? Because I've had this suspicion for a while that a lot of the very well-known, what I call well-known authors, um, who don't win literary prizes but make a huge living. I'm just thinking of, oh, I don't know, the usual sort of people, Stephen King, Peter James, all those people, Lee Child. A lot of them are now using other writers. And I think there's possibly a situation where you have got just so many books, ideas, concepts, new ideas, twists in you. And when you've run out of those, you're desperately searching for new blood. And that's why a lot of these, I know that, my husband and his reading friends have all said, well, we don't buy Lee Child anymore, or we don't buy so-and-so anymore because the books aren't any good. They're not as good as they used to be. And they are being partly written by other people.
Yeah, I think what happens is, yeah, maybe you do. The person writes great stuff. They're successful. They're making big bucks, and they've become a brand. And then they run out of gas, and so somebody, maybe the publisher, in consultation with this author, will say, "Well, we're going to get someone to help you out," because they want to keep the product going. And yeah, with us, of course, it's obviously different. Like there's nobody. We may be a brand in some sense, but we're certainly not an in-demand brand the way those people are. And so we're kind of beating ourselves up. So I don't know. I'm not going to rush out and hire a ghostwriter, that's for sure.
You can use
But that's-
AI now. AI is the new thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Chat
Yes.
GPT.
Yeah. Has anyone, maybe we should try that. Get old Chat GPT, feed your idea kernel in there and say, write a story about blah, blah, blah in the style of Audrey Driscoll. And I wonder what it'll do with that. Try it.
I was going to write a short story, and I still may do it, but the window's quickly closing because there was a couple of articles of how people were now using Chat GPT, right, to create stories and self-publish on Amazon and other places too. And some of the, and especially the periodical magazines were getting submissions from people just using that. And there's this, constraint, worry about it. So I have a short story of science fiction in mind that I don't think one of those AI programs could possibly write, period, for at least another maybe 10, 15 years at best, because it involves constructs that an AI program would never do because it involves a bit of randomness and stuff like that. So I don't want to say right now because I might do it, and I think it would be a fun exercise. So funny you should bring that up.
So anything else?
Maybe we should all make a pact that this
Yeah.
time next month, or give or take a bit, that we will all come back and say, we have written this amount. It doesn't have to be huge, but maybe it will kickstart Audrey and myself and you and Richard in his new, freedom thing, that if we actually give ourselves some sort of deadline, that it might actually help us. I don't know. Maybe this is what we need.
Yeah, I've actually tried that. I think I did that a few weeks ago on the blog. I said, I really need to start writing something new, and so I
read
declare
that.
right here, you guys have read it, that I'm going to do it. And it worked for a while, and then I guess I got distracted somehow. It doesn't take much to push one off one's little writing wheel, that's for sure. I think I got a cold and had to rest up, or maybe we had to deal with something or other, or the weather changed. I don't know what it was, but I had some kind of excuse not to write, and I still haven't gotten back into it yet. So, but maybe declaring we will write for the next month.
Yes.
I can't guarantee because I still have 1 month left, and they're going to probably
yes.
squeeze what they can out of me. But yeah, I will agree that I'll look to start something definitely the month after, because I said that on my Twitter account that starting May 1st, that is going to be my primary daily activity. So yeah.
So my commitment is that I will finish converting the 10 chapters of the jump from first person to third person. probably add in some additional chapters while I'm doing it because I'm trying to do both things at the same time.
I'll be working on the editing of the draft that Mark has read, and other readers I'm sure are going to be telling me it needs more description, because that's what I always get. It needs more description.
Ignore them.
I know.
I
Yeah.
I struggle with writing novel length stories now, I think I mean, I find myself getting even further away from description and just wanting to tell the story. So there's not a lot of meat on the bone other than just the story. And I think Bertrand, reading your draft, I feel like that was really what you were doing too. And without going into, descriptions of every setting and every person and some of that knocks out a lot of words.
That's very modern, though. I mean, we don't sit down. I mean, generally, I mean, the reading public, as I understand it these days, don't sit down and read 6 pages on a description of a daisy and a bluebell next to it. The modern reading wants it to move fast, short chapters, punchy, the sort of thing you can read a bit of as you're commuting from one station to the next, and then pick up the thread again when you're commuting home again. So I think description to a large extent is somewhat defunct nowadays.
Either that or you just have to do it in a kind of compact way. You have to have sort of little intense bits of something that'll kind of rev up the emotion or provide a vivid image in the reader's mind, rather than take a long time to sort of create it bit by bit. So
Yeah, the
maybe
show not tell. Yeah.
Yeah, the old show not tell thing. But yeah, you have to. I mean, there's different techniques to do that, and I'm certainly I can't think of any specifics right now. But you kind of have to stick little bits of sort of like little lights into your text somehow, or little jabs, that'll do that, have that effect, but not the actual description.
I
So, yeah,
read it.
you guys like are working on first draft, so you're obviously going to revisit them and kind of work on them as you go along. Or Mark, do you just write something and then publish it, or consider it done, or do you revisit it?
So, like I mentioned on the jump, I am in the process of what I've written, converting it from first person to third person. So that's a major rewrite. But typically, I do a lot of editing and thinking about the story while I'm writing it, which is also probably one of the reasons why writing is a little bit more difficult for me than people who can just write and edit afterwards. But typically, once I finish a story, once I type the end, I'm done with it. I'll read it, and make little small edits, but in terms of like edits that produce major changes or anything like that, generally no. And I'll have beta readers read it, and if they provide good feedback or comments that suggest something needs to be changed, I'll do that. The novella I published a few months ago, I had 3 or 4 different people rate it. Bertold was one. He mentioned a couple of things. I think the way I described the gun or something like that in it, and there were a few other things, but each of the beta readers identified problems that I needed to fix. So I fixed those problems. But in terms of, again, once I type the end, it's the end. I just generally don't go back and do a lot of editing. So
I sort of like editing. I could fiddle around with a text for forever, and that's why when I go back and reread my own books, I find myself thinking, oh man, I should have taken this out or changed that or put something in here. But I know that they're done. I always read my own stuff in print, so I'm not tempted to start electronically fiddling.
what were you going to say?
This latest project of mine is the first one where I'm really looking forward to editing it. Normally I hate that, but I'm actually, with this one, I'm excited because I have some ideas.
The one that I just read?
Yeah, yeah.
So
Hey, take your time on it because I still haven't started Carrie Rubin's book. I've got a backlog, and I do want to read yours. I still have got to finish Mark's. In fact,
see, that's you need to rereading instead of writing.
well, that's it. I honestly will have a lot more time to read. That has because I'm some nights I'm reading work related materials.
Okay.
Yeah, I
So
find that reading a lot can often get me back into writing. And I'm reading a book every 3 days at the moment for reviewing. And yeah, it's helping. It's just taking longer than normal.
Yeah,
okay.
reading can help in the sense of even if you kind of read something and you think, man, I could do a better job of the stories this person did, and that might get you going.
Oh, reading distractions for me because frequently I think, okay, I got to do this morning and then something early in the afternoon, and then okay, so three from 3 to 5 I'll write. The three rolls around and I think, I'm at this point in that book that I'm reading. I can just read a little bit more, and then I end up reading instead of writing.
Yep, that does happen.
But retirement is a time to enjoy. And for me, I've put myself under a lot of possibly unnecessary pressure, which, there are times I think, oh, I'll sit down and write. And I'm thinking, I don't feel like it right now. Why am I doing this? This is crazy. I would much rather go and read a book or, sit and chat to a friend or something like that. So I think this is a psychological milestone I've come to. And yeah, having got a good third way into this next book, I will finish it. There's no way I won't finish it. But will I write after that? I don't know. Maybe I won't.
Yeah, I mean, we're not obligated to keep going until we, drop dead at the desk kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, but it's tough to say, although who knows? I mean, supposing you say, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to write anymore. And then a couple months later or a year later, you get a really good idea. No one's going to stop you from writing again. It's not like you've, cashed in your license or whatever. So, sometimes a person just needs a break, but I think we need to be nicer to ourselves and not
Right.
flog ourselves.
I've gone through at least technically 4 different careers in my life. I mean, completely changed. So sometimes, this newest one is going to be more writer focused. So yeah, if there's a point where I feel if there's a point where there's something else you'd rather do, especially, just go try it and do it. Sometimes that'll bring you back to what you really want, and sometimes you are in a new ballpark you want to play in. So
Okay. Anything else? We solved the problems of the world.
I think I think
For
we're
now,
people
Yeah.
can breathe easier.
What?
People can breathe easier. We've done it.
We all
Just think of all those people out there who says, I'd love to write a book. I'd love to see my name in print. I really would, but I
Would.
haven't got. And we've all done it and we've all succeeded in that. So we don't really need to feel bad or guilty because we're not churning them out like a meat grinder.
This is all you need, or a pen.
So we've some of us have made some firm commitments to something we want to get done before our next chat. And our next chat will be April after I get back from New York City.
okay.
That's good because I've never missed a deadline in 40 years. So I'm not going to miss this one. I will definitely be writing.
All right, good to hear.
Good luck to
Might only be 20 words, but I'll try.
And Mark, if you want to make an 80-mile south detour from New York City,
Okay, I'll email you. We're going to be very busy, so who knows, but I'll email you.
okay.
Okay,
Okay, have a good trip, Mark.
thank
Yep.
you.
enjoy it.
Okay. Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye bye.